Boa noite a todas e a todos. Vamos dar início à última mesa do dia do Festival Literário do Museu Judaico, a sétima do programa, oitava do programa. Como vocês, a gente também está se perdendo nas contas. Eu sou Daniel Douek, curador, junto com a Rita Palmeira, do Festival Literário, e a gente tem a honra de receber nessa mesa o filósofo afro-judeu jamaicano Lewis Gordon. Autor de Medo, consciência, negra, Lewis Gordon discutirá o antirracismo em suas articulações com outras questões de identidade e pertencimento, tais como gênero, classe social, nacionalidade, ideologia, política e religião. Eu queria lembrar que essa mesa integra a série Judeidade e Negritude, um ciclo de discussões correalizado pelo Museu Judaico de São Paulo, pela Casa Sueli Carneiro e pelo Instituto Brasil-Israel. Essas instituições apoiam a realização dessa atividade. Então, queria chamar ao palco Lewis Gordon e Mylene Mizrahi, que vai fazer a apresentação.
Boa noite a todos. É um prazer estar aqui conversando com o filósofo Lewis Gordon, que a gente conversou algumas vezes ao longo desses dias. Lewis Gordon, como o Daniel falou, é um filósofo afro-judeu, professor da Universidade de Connecticut. Eu vou uma pausa, tentar falar não muito rápido, porque o Lewis entende um pouco de português. E, além de filósofo e acadêmico, ele é também músico, educador, escreve resenhas de culinária. Enfim, ele é um multiartista e um multiacadêmico, vamos dizer assim. Ele é autor do livro Medo, consciência, negra, que foi publicado no Brasil em 2022 pela Todavia, onde ele apresenta uma reflexão muito original sobre negritude, racismo, antirracismo, identidade. E a gente vai falar sobre essas coisas todas e como essa reflexão original me parece estar muito atravessada pelo fato dele ser judeu, ou um negro judeu, ou um judeu negro. Os meus comentários aqui estão também atravessados pelo 7 de outubro, em Israel. Então, em alguns momentos, talvez eu faça alguma ponte, mas foi inevitável ler seu livro atravessada por esses acontecimentos. E, por fim, como o Daniel disse, essa mesa faz parte desse ciclo Negritude de Judeidade, que é outro tema que deve aparecer aqui nas minhas provocações. Então, começando a apresentar o Lewis, eu quero ler um trecho dele mesmo, como ele se apresenta, que eu acho muito bonito. Então, eu vou ler. Todas as autoridades, todas as imagens de autoridade, beleza e amor da minha infância eram de pessoas que, nos contextos da América do Norte e da Europa, cruzavam linhas divisórias de cor. A imagem suprema de autoridade na minha família era meu avô materno, Uriah Iwan, que chamávamos simplesmente de avô. Avô tinha mais de 2 metros de altura, era um panamenho liberiano de pele escura na faixa dos 90 anos. Minhas outras imagens de autoridade eram minha bisavó materna, Beatrice Norton Ewan, uma judia de ascendência irlandesa, escocesa e tamil. Minha avó paterna, Gertrude Stoddart, chinesa e escocesa. E minhas muitas tias de diversos tons de pele. Minha principal imagem de beleza era minha mãe, Yvonne Patricia Solomon, uma mulher de pele escura de ascendência judaica de ambos os lados, uma vez que sua linhagem judaica irlandesa materna se cruzou com sua linhagem judaica palestina paterna. A família, para mim, era algo multicolorido, e ainda é. E aí, a partir daí, Luiz, se você pudesse falar um pouco para a gente, né, sobre seu conceito de consciência negra, com negro, né, onde o negra é com letra maiúscula, porque, quer dizer, de um lado, a gente vai falar sobre isso, ele está atravessado por essa sua condição, essa sua judeidade, mas está também, e a gente vê isso muito no seu texto, e em você mesmo, né? Quer dizer, essa sua questão, essa coisa corporal e performática que é muito sua. Então, também no seu texto, quando você se apresenta, você vai falar que seu primeiro enfrentamento ao racismo foi na escola, no Bronx, onde você reagiu corporalmente a um primeiro ataque, ou, enfim, distrato por racismo. E o que eu acho interessante é que o que a gente vê é que isso você carrega para a sua própria conceituação, né, de consciência negra, com letra maiúscula. Então, se você pudesse falar um pouco mais, né, sobre esse lugar do corpo no seu próprio pensamento. Quer dizer, de algum modo, você me faz lembrar até os atores de teatro, em que pensar e agir corporalmente caminham juntos. O corpo não é um reflexo do pensamento, mas essas duas coisas estão ao mesmo tempo. E eu acho que isso você mostra muito bem no seu texto para a gente, né? Como a performance é pensar também, né? Pensamento e ação estão ali juntos. Então, essa seria uma... se você pudesse falar um pouco mais, né? Por que você tira o sapato? Né? Eu vi um vídeo seu no MASP em que você batuca os vários compassos para provar ou mostrar o seu argumento. Né? É isso. Se você pudesse começar falando um pouquinho sobre essa dimensão da performance no seu próprio modo de pensar e produzir seus conceitos.
Muito obrigado, Mylene. That doesn't sound very colonial, does it? In fact, we're all connected. Do you remember that beat? Everybody in this room was introduced to life through our mother's heartbeat. It synchronized us. It brought us into a world, and it enables us to communicate. Other animals' heartbeats might be, or maybe, but we are here. Hotep, Shalom, or perhaps Shavua Tov. Assalamu alaikum. Ujambo. So many ways to say hello. Boa noche. In South Africa, you could say Sawubona. Sawubona means I see you. Imagine being lost in the wilderness. You're afraid, you're alone. And someone looks and says, I see you. You exhale. You're not alone. But shalom, or hotep, is often translated as peace. But it's not peace in terms of war and absence. It's peace in the sense of wishing people a good life. It's wishing dignity to the other. Even with the heartbeat, which is shared all the way across Homo sapiens, to to our other ancestors, Homo erectus, all the way back to Australopithecus, we have this. I take off my shoes because it is an honor and it is sacred to meet, to speak, and to celebrate truth. And truth requires evidence and accountability. That's to the ancestors and to those to come and those who are here. I also do it because it's comfortable. And there's another reason.
People would think that it's not comfortable to do that.
Some would. And then there's another. I'm from Jamaica. And some people say you take the man out of the island, but not the island out of the man. All are true. But the one in my heart is the sacredness of what it is to be responsible to a community when I speak. As well, the body. There's the negative view of the body. To treat the body as a thing that you can do anything to. But there's the lived body. The body that breathes in oxygen, exhales carbon dioxide. The body that communicates. The body that loves. The body that is not a thing, but relationships. In a way, this whole room is relationships. I thank you, Melanie, in this relationship for us to speak. I thank the Simon family for the relationship they established through commitment for this room. I thank Philippe, Daniel, Mariana, Mariella. There's so many people, because nothing here is from a thing or one person, but the personhood of relationships. Connected to the Black, but we could also say Jew. For me, being Black and being Jewish are not separate. Okay? It's funny what has happened to the world. When I say I'm Jewish, some people act like I crashed a party. You know, everybody's dancing, it's a Jewish, and then I say, and they, what's up? But that is new. You see, in my childhood, I was lucky in that I was not introduced to Jewishness as trauma. For me, it was just family and life. And similarly, when I look at all the colors of my family, it was love and life. The experiences that had negative Blackness, like the terrible names, were the same time as the experience of negative Jewishness. I saw people throw pennies at Jews, had terrible words. I saw that in the United States with Blackness. And so in a way, the negative version is what the people who hate you throw onto you. But you don't have to accept that. And one of the things I already knew was that there was a beautiful Blackness. Mm-hmm. and a beautiful Jewishness. I thank my colleagues at Todavia, Andre and all of them. This is a cool cover, huh? When I had lunch, I had a shirt that said, "Danger, educated black man." There are people who would want black people not to think. And there are people who think the world would be better if Jewish people don't think. Well, a lot of people show Jewish people think, and that has been threatening people, as David pointed out in the first night. And for some people to put thinking, which is powerful, with blackness together, is to create black power, which scares them. So you could imagine what people think when they see a black Jew.
It's too much.
Too much. But the thing is, the capital B black. And today we have the capital J Jew. There was a time it was small. Is to say I am a human being with possibility. And that possibility requires an extraordinary power to transform the world with our relationships. I could say more, but we will continue.
Okay. Well, we can continue in different ways, or paths. I don't know, maybe we should talk a bit about music.
Sure, I love music.
I know you have a great chapter on music. I think maybe for me is my favorite on your book. On this book that really we have a great cover. So we'll talk about music and aesthetics and body and hair. Desculpa. É que eu tava... I was talking in English. So, eu vou continuar em português.
Em português.
Porque eu estava te ouvindo em inglês e pensando, pouco pensando junto. Desculpa. Então, no seu capítulo sobre música, vamos falar um pouco sobre racismo e agência. E às vezes eu penso como que nós, judeus, podemos aprender a lidar com esse antissemitismo hoje, pensando com essa agência antirracista sobre a qual você fala tanto. E no seu capítulo sobre música, você, enfim, faz uma análise sobre o blues e o bebop. E como, claro, a gente sabe que o blues é essa música da melancolia, da tristeza, mas ela vai derivar no bebop. E você fala sobre como esse bebop ele tem uma métrica, ele tem toda uma lógica, o seu aspecto formal é radicalmente diferente de qualquer coisa que os brancos tinham feito em termos de música, inclusive até ali. E você vai falar sobre como isso depois se perde, né, na própria música negra americana. Esse modo radicalmente negro de produzir uma manifestação artística, cultural, estética na música, né? E aí eu fiquei lembrando, e aí eu estou olhando para os seus trançados ou peote, pensando nisso, que eu trabalho muito com cabelos negros. Quando eu comecei a pesquisar isso com mulheres no funk carioca, na música funk, o que eu via muito eram cabelos anelados, mas não necessariamente negros. Cabelos que eu chamei de ambíguos, porque eles não eram evidentemente negros, de mulheres negras, mas também não eram, como elas me diziam, um cabelo de mulheres brancas. Não era o cabelo liso que elas buscavam. E isso foi mudando. E hoje, quer dizer, em fim dos anos 2010, a gente surge aí um ativismo negro, né, que é feito junto com os cabelos, principalmente das mulheres, com os afros, blacks, os trançados e o turbante. Então, a gente vê ali um modo radicalmente negro, que é radicalmente não branco também, né? Então, pensando nisso, eu me perguntei aonde que essa radicalidade de uma estética negra estaria se ela não está mais na música, nos Estados Unidos. Onde é que a gente pode ver esse enfrentamento dos racismos cotidianos, se isso nos Estados Unidos está aonde? Está no corpo? Porque, por exemplo, na capa do seu livro, o que a gente vê, de algum modo, é isso, né? É uma foto tirada durante os protestos, né, dos Black Lives Matter, depois da morte do George Floyd. E aqui a gente vê esse modo negro muito no corpo, junto com a indumentária, junto com o cabelo, junto com a bandana no cabelo, lenço. Então, eu fiquei me perguntando isso. Se não está mais na música, nos Estados Unidos, onde é que está? Se você pudesse falar isso um pouco para a gente, assim.
Okay, that is a lot.
Yes, sorry.
It's okay. First, I will say some foundational things. In the book, I remind people of some observations I've seen all across the world. Everywhere I go, most people think their black people are the black people. It's just like many people think their Jews are the Jews. Some people, when they open this book, they only want to see the version of black people they know. Mm-hmm. But I've gone all across the world, and I've seen so many ways black people live as black people. Some people, for instance, would like blackness to be exclusively African. Mm-hmm. But the people in Australia who are black people. The people in South Asia, like Dalits, are black people. The people all across, and even some people who don't look like the black people we are used to, are black people. And it's a similar thing I've known because of my work in Jewish activism. Mm-hmm. My children are lucky because, it's funny, when I created the Center for Afro-Jewish Studies, people used to ask me, why did you call it Afro-Jewish Studies? They said, do you mean blacks and Jews? Mm-hmm. And I said, no, I mean black Jews. And then they say, why black Jews? And as we talk, then they say, well, why don't you just say Jewish diversity? And I said, if I said that, you would just think Ashkenazi Sephardic. But you notice by putting black Jews, you ask me questions. And my children grew up knowing not only black Sephardic Jews, black Ashkenazi Jews, black Mizrahi Jews, but they also grew up knowing about Kaifeng Jews, Lemba Jews, Koshin Jews, Sudanese Jews. I could keep going because I've worked with 150 Jewish organizations worldwide. Now, what this brings up is a next move. So first from my Jews are the Jews, when in fact there are many kinds of Jews. My blacks are the blacks. Many kinds of blacks. But then we get to the next part. Some people could only see us negatively. Imagine, some people think as a black man, I get up in the morning, and I say this in the book, I get up in the morning, I go to brush my teeth, I look in the mirror and say, still black. Now I have to do black things. And then all the stereotypes follow. Could you imagine if you get up in the morning as a Jew, still Jewish? Now I got to do Jewish things. But those are often stereotypes. However, what they miss are the beautiful things, what we love about our communities. There's a presumption if you're black that you suffer being black. But I know many countries where if you want a good time, good food, good music, life, you go to black neighborhoods. When I think of, say, my Jewishness, I don't only think about people who hate Jews. I think about the aspects of Jewish life I love. And for me, there's no separation with them, with the black life I love. And you may say, and that connects to your point about aesthetics. Because you see, when people hear the blues, they only think of the blues as suffering. So they think when I say still black, then there's and as I'm walking through the world, there's B.B. King behind me. You know, and then there's the chorus, poor black man, poor black man. However, when you look at blues music, there's something profound. Blues music always addresses contradictions. In blues music, you are able to look at the sounds people want to avoid. In fact, the thesis of the book, Fear of Black Consciousness, what are people afraid of? And it's that black consciousness is a truth. Many people prefer what I call pleasing falsehoods, lies. It's easy to live with lies that tell you you're superior and other people are inferior. It's more difficult to live with the truth of human existence, that there's no superior or inferior people, just people struggling to live. And in the blues, I could give you 3 illustrations. The first is about music. Some of you know I play drums, but I also play other instruments. And I play piano. And in the book, I bring this up. There was many times I go, wherever there's a piano, I'll play it. But as you know, not everyone has time to tune a piano. So invariably, some places I go, I would walk over to the piano and my host will run and say, it's not tuned. And I would say, don't worry. So I would play the piano. And after I play the piano, I always, when I speak, I go early. So the hosts don't have to worry about having the speaker. So because I'm early, I'm playing the piano sometimes for a half hour. Then when the crowd arrives, they're often cheering and happy, and my hosts come over and say, I thought the piano was untuned, that it wasn't tuned. And I look at them and I say, it isn't tuned. And then they're shocked. And then I say, just because you're out of tune doesn't mean you can't make music. A lot of racism, and I agree with my position, I say it in the book, anti-Semitism is a racism. Okay? Oh, wow, I didn't realize now I'm really rocking. Anyway, a lot of anti-Semitism is a racism. The thing with a lot of racism is to tell everybody to be in tune. However, there is so much music between the notes. In blues, you try your best to get the between notes, the blue note, the notes that people try to avoid. And these notes are nothing short of dealing with the complexity, the tragedy, and the challenges of adult life. And what I find interesting is it also challenges how we think of poetry, music, and other forms. So I give you one example. If you listen to blues lyrics, the blues artist always repeats, announces something. And when it's repeated, it's different. But then the blues artist gets to a certain point where the blues artist has a twist. And the twist is about responsibility. So I'll give you an example. Dinah Washington, a famous blues singer, had a song called, I think it's Blow Top Blues or Crazy Wig Blues. I don't remember the exact title, but I remember the lyric. She said, I got high last night and I took my man to his wife's front door. Now, at first you hear this, and then she says it again. Yes, I got high last night and I took my man to his wife's front door. And then she says, but she was a 45 packing mama, so I ain't gonna do that no more. Now, what she's saying is I take responsibility for my actions. In a lot of blues music, the suffering is stated, but the humanity of the sufferer is affirmed. So now we connect it to something like hip hop. There are a lot of complicated hip hops, but there was a hip hop artist named Biz Markie. Have any of you heard of Biz Markie? Oh, if you haven't, oh good, somebody has. Biz Markie is a great rapper, and he cannot sing. But he has a song in which he sings off key. So it has a beat. Right? And then he says, I have to make it off key. Sorry. He says, you got what I need, but you say he's just a friend. You say and he goes and he sings and he goes and he puts his heart and soul. And it's one of the best songs ever. Because as he is off key, you see his feelings, his pathos, his life. And when I remember one time I was at a party and that song came on and the whole audience started singing off key. You got it, everybody. And here's the thing. It is life affirming. And here's why. Even though there's capitalism, commodification of music, the fundamental thing, like when I started with the heartbeat, is that music and dance, the corporeality, the physicality, are connected. And in fact, I think even more than the question of what people are doing to music with lyrics is increasingly, except in a lot of Brazil, a lot of people are creating music where people don't dance. And the thing about dancing is that dancing makes you vulnerable. You ever seen a person afraid to dance? They don't, there's a party, the music, everybody's dancing, and that person is, nah, man, I don't dance. However, there's some people who can't dance, but they go on the floor anyway, and they have joy. And no matter how much, think about it, if you're in a community where you can dance and have joy, even though you're not a good dancer, the community affirms the value of your joy. So the blues, what's interesting is that, and in many parts of Black aesthetic, is that it's not an aesthetic of control. Colonial aesthetics, you know when I did that beat? Colonial aesthetic says, cut it out. Mm-hmm. What you should do is, but if you free the beat, you have the dancing, you have the connection. That is an affirmation of life. So I see the blues as taking responsibility for what it is to live together, and that includes also suffering together, but a suffering that comes back where we take collective responsibility to create joy.
Ok. Obrigada. Obrigada.
Now I'm warm.
Então, pensando vocês, nas duas, talvez nas suas duas falas agora, você mencionou a colonialidade e decolonialidade. Talvez a gente pudesse falar um pouquinho sobre isso, pensando com o fato, né, de você ser um afro-judeu e também um especialista, um grande especialista no Frantz Fanon. E toda essa discussão do 7 do 10 no Brasil, talvez, enfim, ou que a gente viu, reverberou muito nessa chave de colonialidade e decolonialidade. E se recorreu muito ao Frantz Fanon, que é esse pensador, para colocar, quer dizer, colocando os judeus como os colonizadores, né, e os palestinos como os colonizados, né? E, junto com isso, surgiram alguns memes, né, onde aí um deles falava, né, Daniel, quando você mata um colonizador, você está matando duas pessoas, quer dizer, você está matando o colonizador, mas também a figura do colonizado, né? Então, é como se o colonizado desaparecesse. Isso tudo foi pensado a partir do que Frantz Fanon, a análise de Frantz Fanon, né, pensando com a colonização francesa na Argélia. E aí, pensando, quer dizer, e ao mesmo tempo, a gente ouve também muitas análises que vão dizer que Frantz Fanon era antissemita. Seria. E aí eu fiquei me perguntando, eu pensei, vou perguntar ao Lewis Gordon, né, um afro-judeu mesmo, né, com as suas peiotes, que escreve Deus, faz questão de escrever Deus, omitindo o né, como os religiosos escreveriam, usa as suas tranças como peiote, como os religiosos escreveriam. Então, afinal, ele é um especialista em Fanon. O que ele diria que Fanon diria sobre esse uso da análise dele para enquadrar, né, na chave da colonialidade e da decolonialidade um conflito tão complexo como esse que está se desenrolando agora, né? Quer dizer, que está se desenrolando, não, mas que enfim, que a gente está vendo aí num momento de crise.
Okay. There are several things we have to deal with. Okay, so first, Fanon died in 1961 at the age of 36.
Mm-hmm.
So here we are 62 years later, and so the Fanon people are talking about is from another century, dealing with the specific problems that were very different than ours.
Mm-hmm.
And some people refuse to accept that. Okay? So to get to that, I'm going to tell two stories, because the danger when you're a professor is you get too professorial.
Mm-hmm.
okay? And people forget we're talking about a human being. The first is a colonial story. I talk about it in the book. The colonial story goes this way. There was a minister from an Anglican school, and he went to inspect a colonial school. And he wanted to make sure they were getting a good colonial education. You got it? Now, already that is strange, a good colonial education, which would mean miseducation. When he was on his way to the school, a little boy was late for school. He stopped the little boy and asked him, "Could you tell me who knocked down the walls of Jericho?" The little boy, this is in the island of Trinidad. The little boy looked at the minister and he said, "Not me." The minister became upset. So he held the boy and took him into the school. He said, "Who is your teacher?" He said, "Mr. Smith." So they go to Mr. Smith's class. Now, who is Mr. Smith? Mr. Smith is a man who went through colonial education. He was beaten, he suffered, but he's from a small village and he was able to become a school teacher. And he wanted opportunities for other children from his village. So the minister said, "Are you Mr. Smith?" And Mr. Smith said, "Yes, sir." He said, "I just asked this boy who knocked down the walls of Jericho. And do you know what he told me?" "What did he tell you, sir?" "He said he didn't do it." So Mr. Smith looked at the boy, looked at the minister, took off his glasses, and said, "Well, sir, I've known this boy a long time. If he said he didn't do it, he didn't do it." Now, in the book, I talk about misunderstanding, misinformation, the very situation. Of course, the boy knew the biblical story. Of course, Mr. Smith did. But the situation of colonial imposition and violence made it so strange that you got strange answers. Fanon understood this because he also went to colonial schools. His brother, Joby, who was almost like his twin, told a story. So this is the second story. When Fanon was a little boy, a bunch of other little boys got into a fight with him. They were beating the pulp out of him. But Fanon, because his mother had a little shop, he had a man's razor in his pocket. And he took it out and fought the boys, so they got cut. And the boys ran away. Now, the mother of those boys, seeing them cut, came and argued with his mother. And Fanon's mother said, "They're children, let them work it out." She went back angry. So then Fanon's father, Casimir, came home, and he was informed that the father was very angry and the situation now is escalating. What Fanon's father did was to take a bottle of wine. He went to the boy's father and they drank together and talked about things. And eventually the boys, the two families, became best friends. Now, why do I tell this story? Although it's a true story about Fanon's childhood, people don't know how much it informed his adult political life. Because Fanon was a soldier, a psychiatrist, a warrior. But Fanon was not a man of hate. What people don't understand is that Fanon understood the opposite of violence is not nonviolence. The opposite of violence is anti-violence. Now, what is the difference? Nonviolence, you stand to the side and let people get harmed. Anti-violence, you intervene knowing you get entangled in violence. But your goal is to get rid of violence. Why this is important is that many people who talk about someone like Fanon, and in my book, and this I support this position, the problem with the nonviolence and counter-violence model, not anti-violence, but counter-violence, is it separates everybody into black and white, friend and enemy. It's the logic of war. Many of you in this room are with partners, husbands, wives, or they, whatever you identify. Your relationship is healthy if you can have conflicts that enable you to grow. In fact, a lot of Jewish history and thought is about conflicts that require growth. And the reason you can grow is because you're committed to the relationship. Casimir Fanon, Fanon's father, was committed to coexistence, which is why he went knowing that it was turning into war to communicate about living together. Now, what happens if you look at your wife, husband, or partner as an enemy instead of someone you're committed to coexisting and living with and loving? It means you only want to win. And that means that you could destroy the relationship. But here's the problem. You can win, but be wrong. There are many people who win battles and wars and are wrong. However, if the purpose is a commitment to living together, to coexistence, then it's not war, it's conflict. And why this is important is the distinction between moralistic, enemy-producing separation versus politics, political solutions. One of the theses in the book, and in my work, not just the book, my position is that racism, including anti-Semitism, which I argue is a racism, colonialism, sexism, homophobia, classism, all of these are political problems. Political problems require political solutions. People who are not mature or people who are afraid of what's involved in political solutions, because political solutions require hard work. Fanon's father could have got hit in the face when he went over there. His father could have been thrown out. But it requires the love and the courage to commit yourself to something greater than yourself. Because his father wanted the children to have a future of living together. So when Fanon said anti-colonial violence, he was not fetishizing violence. Fanon, in fact, hated violence. But his view is if you really hate violence, you do something about it. So if we look at the world today, some people don't want that part of Fanon. They want Fanon to be stuck at the moment of decolonizing. But his book, the famous book, Le Damné de la Terre, The Damned of the Earth, he talked about the decolonizing violence in the first chapter, but the rest of the book is about something else. It's about asking the people, what future are you committed to living? And people who want to eradicate other people, are actually committed to creating enemies. But people who are committed to the political struggle of creating a world of coexistence, those people, Fanon argue, understand we need to build a new world. And just two more things quickly. What Fanon was struggling for when he died was what he called the United States of Africa. Okay? And I put my cards on the table. I am against nation states, all nation states. And the reason I am is because when you put a nation with a state, you create illegal people, people who don't belong, people who are vulnerable. I'm not against nations, and Fanon wasn't against nations. But a nation state, the difficulty there is if you took states away, now we have to think imaginatively about a different organization of power on our planet. You know, in the beginning of this answer, I said Fanon lived in a different world. He lived in a world where to go from Algiers to Sao Paulo would take a very long time. We live in a world where you could do it in under a day. We can communicate with anybody on this planet in a nanosecond. When the time to cover space is quicker, space shrinks. We live on a smaller planet. Our planet is a tiny village. Why are we using values for a larger planet when we live on a smaller one? And so Fanon, he was thinking United States of Africa, but I'm thinking about a united planet. And I think we can't afford a planet of producing vulnerable people, a planet of people who don't belong. No human being should be illegal on this planet. And as long as we keep doing that, we have a planet of war instead of coexistence. We need the right, I would argue, reading of Fanon is going to be a reading of political commitment. One last thing. Fanon was a committed person against anti-Semitism. He was the black soldiers liberating concentration camps. He was a person who, when a lot of people were very critical that he had Jewish interns in Algeria and in Tunisia, stood up against it and defended them. If you look at his writings, there is not a single book by Fanon in which he actually attacked even the existence of the state of Israel. And a lot of people don't like that. In fact, there was a fellow, because sometimes he used a fake name, Faris. There was a complaint waged against him as a spy of Israel. And his comrade said, this is ridiculous. But you see, some people want you to have enemies. Either you're an enemy of Israel or you're a Zionist. That's the way they look at things. But Fanon saw the problem as greater. And there's a lot more to say on this issue, but here's the thing. I don't know what the Fanon of today, I don't want to speak for him. I could only say the Fanon of yesterday saw the connections between anti-Black racism and anti-Semitism and was committed to fighting against all kinds of dehumanization.
Ótimo, muito obrigada. Eu acho que ajudou muita gente a pensar, né? Principalmente essa ideia de não esquecer que Fanon estava escrevendo, né, no outro século, analisando outras relações, e que você não pode transplantar, né, os enquadres analíticos, que talvez seja esse um dos problemas, né? Você pega e cria uma fórmula para analisar relações de poder, como nessa chave colonialidade e decolonialidade. E aí tem uma pergunta do público que eu acho que tem a ver um pouco com isso. Quer dizer, tem a ver, talvez, com os limites desse enquadre da colonialidade. E a pergunta é, em que medida o debate corrente, público e acadêmico sobre Palestina e Israel marca um ponto de virada ou os limites, fim, da pós-modernidade, do identitarismo e ou de uma certa aplicação dos estudos coloniais. Acho que é bem o que eu estava... Né? Eu acho que tem tudo a ver essa pergunta. Nosso colega ali, Daniel Strum. Ok.
Okay. I wrote, not only in this book, but in another book called Freedom, Justice, and Decolonization. I have problems with how people simply expect certain terms to be rigid, and they don't question them critically. So, for instance, in a lot of what's called decolonial studies, they simply use the word modern as if it's European. But what in the world is a European? You know, Europe is a phony continent. There's just this big continent called Asia. There's East Asia, Central Asia, West Asia. West Asia was changed into Europe because there are people who wanted a homeland for the birth of white people. When that's not even historically accurate. Light-skinned people evolved in Central Asia and moved to West Asia. But when colonialism came, a lot of lies were forced on people. And one of the lies is that any thought, any concept, any good idea had to come from a European. But nobody really asks in that group, what does the word modern really mean? Well, modern just simply means to belong to the present. And so if you belong to the present, how do you belong to the present? Well, you belong to the present through being the direction of the future. So to say only Europeans can be modern is to erase all peoples from the future. But many people are fighting to have a future. If you're fighting to have a future, you're modern. If there's a future with black people, that's Afro-modern or black modern. If it's Indo-modern, in fact, forms of patriarchy. We want a future where people can have sexuality and gender that's different from the Euromodern. And so once we understand this, now we begin to go into certain other concepts that we must unpack. It's not only the modern, but even the question of the decolonial. Catherine Walsh, a very famous decolonial theorist, said something similar to what I said about political solutions. She said, decolonizing for what? What society do you want to live in? And that is, again, thinking the future. So how can you realistically be anti-modern? If you're really anti-modern, then you should erase yourself from having a future. So that doesn't work. Now, once we understand this problem, now we begin to understand several others. So, for instance, one of the things I'm critical of is how we talk about the right and the left. A lot of people never ask, what is the consciousness of a right-wing person? Oh, by the way, the right and the left is artificial. It came out of the French Parliament. The monarchists, the traditionalists were the right. But what they have in common is that right and the left are how people respond to crises. A crisis is when you're forced to make a decision. Some people don't want to make decisions. They want someone to make decisions for them. They miss the days when they had daddy. And they look for powerful men, usually. It's very gendered. Because you see, the imagined notion is that there is a masculine protector with laws, order. In this country, just suffered through right-wing ideas. And if you think about it, it was constantly talking about macho, strong, protect. And some people are even want to go even more radically to the right. They want to climb back into the womb. They want to have a time when there was no decision. But then there's some people who say, you know what? The people in the past also had crises, and they had to make decisions. It's just our turn. So if we're going to make decisions, instead of trying to go to an imagined perfect past, let's commit ourselves to build a better future. However, that's called the left. But some people on the left are afraid of the uncertainty. They want to know the outcome before the performance. And so they moralize, they're against the state. Everything is what they're against. And that kind of a left, and I never thought a day would come where I'll say it, but we're living in a time of a right-wing left. Mm-hmm. A right-wing left. A right-wing left violates everything that makes sense for a left. What do I mean? If you're committed to the openness of human possibility, then you're like what Fanon said, right? You're anti-war, but that doesn't mean that you're not active. But you're active for something, the dignity and freedom of others. It means you're not arrogant. You understand as a human being, you're not a god. And so you don't know the outcome, but the struggle must be waged. You act from radical love. People don't have to be like you for you to love them. You respect their freedom and humanity. And as we begin to build those things, it means then you're not going to try to have an alliance with people who are going to argue that you erase freedom, possibility, love, creativity. So we're in a real scary moment because there are people who identify as left who are fighting to empower groups who, if they were in power, the first thing they will do is eliminate the left. Mm-hmm. They'll subjugate the lives of women. They will queer people, no. And they tend to endorse views that are closed. So what we're dealing with, why I say right-wing left, is that we have the following. The first right wing is very simple. You have an enemy. The right wing is always about who you get rid of. As long as you only hear the language of eliminate and enemies, that's a right wing. The other kind of right wing says you eliminate to have the control of a father or a God. That's theocracy. Mm-hmm. And then there's another version that says you eliminate creativity and because you want purity. No differences, no dissent, no others. The problem with that is, you remember that example what I said, oxygen and human world is dialectical and creative. To be a human being is to be a relationship. These are people who want to take us out of relationships. So the question, if you say political solutions, is to now deal with a struggle where you don't know the outcome before the performance, which means there's a different question. And it goes back to the blues. Because the blues, remember, is saying the way it is not the way it has to be. Well, what happens now is the idea that I don't need to know the outcome. I need to ask what commitments are valuable. And that existential commitment to something greater than yourself, which is a humanity whom you may never know, that is a different kind of left. But that left is now imperiled. Since we're in a Jewish museum, you know I just told the story of Moses. Because many people at Pesach, you know, when children are to ask about the story, as we know, Miriam, Aaron, Moses never entered the promised land. Now think about that, right? The greatest, I was in an interview recently where they asked me to explain Moses. I said, look, Moses is the greatest hero in all of Jewish history. Moses is the man, the Mac Daddy, the everything. But Moses didn't enter the promised land. And it makes political sense. How do you build a new society with Moses? Could you imagine, Moses, I think we should try it this way. Moses would go, how do you argue with Moses? And this is what Fanon was saying, that for subsequent generations to have the creativity to live a life livable for them, we must let some things go. And that letting go is an act of love. So I see what's being lost, the right-wing left, is a left built on hate. Mm-hmm. But the commitment to life requires love.
Ok, perfeito. Nós não temos muito mais tempo, mas eu vou aproveitar esse pouco tempo que a gente tem e eu acho que a gente vai seguir por esse caminho, né?
I will be short.
Não, porque eu estava pensando nesse termo que você usa ali no seu capítulo 4. Você parte de 2 episódios muito curiosos, que marcaram muito. Eu vou olhar aqui o meu relógio para não perder. o debate público nas mídias, que foi a vinda a público de que a mãe das irmãs Kardashian e Jenner era uma mulher trans, né? E o segundo foi também o fato que veio à tona de que uma liderança negra era, na verdade, uma negra trans, e que ela não poderia, portanto, estar representando os negros. E isso foi um bafafá na mídia, inclusive isso chegou no Brasil também. E você vai usar esse episódio para falar justamente um pouco sobre o que você estava falando agora, sobre como fugir do sectarismo, como parar de pensar as pessoas, as identidades, as raças. Se você pode fazer transição de sexo, você até fala isso, e é muito ousado, por que não podemos pensar numa transracialização de fato? Né? Por que não pensar em muitas raças? E eu, lendo aquilo, eu falei, nossa, isso é muito ousado. Né? Para quem lê enfim, a discussão sobre identidade racial, étnico-racial, é muito ousado isso. E aí você finalmente... Desliguei? Acho que eu desliguei. Está indo. Aí você finalmente chega nessa frase miscigenando, que também é um tabu hoje, né? Falar em miscigenação. Miscigenação chegou a ser pensado como a morte, né, ou o genocídio mesmo da identidade negra. No Brasil, inclusive, quando a gente fala, por exemplo, em que a democracia racial é uma falácia. E aí eu me perguntei, e eu acho que, no fundo, é isso mesmo. Quer dizer, a contribuição do ser judeu ao seu pensamento parece que te permite essa certa, ao mesmo tempo, liberdade e uma aposta na mistura. Que, num certo sentido, é isso. O judeu, é difícil essencializar o judeu. Que eu acho que o Fanon falava isso, quando ele fala, estou cansado de ser escravo da minha aparência. Eu queria ser como o judeu, que só é odiado quando é descoberto. Então, o judeu tem essa possibilidade de passar invisível. E me parece que, enfim, que esse judeu do seu afro-judeu te dá essa... Se você pudesse falar isso um pouquinho antes da gente acabar. E aí acho interessante que depois você fala para a gente no livro, e eu não sabia disso, que uma das pessoas que forja a hashtag Black Lives Matter é uma afro-judia. Então, se você pudesse assim, falar um pouco sobre esse miscigenando e a contribuição da sua judeidade a isso.
Okay, because I know we have a short time. This connects to my previous answer. Remember in my previous answer, I am critical of what I call the right-wing turn that closes things. Mm-hmm. So in my work, and in this book, and all my work, I am critical of authenticity, mm-hmm. because whenever people push authenticity, they're just pushing themselves as the authentic representation. I'm against essentialism, but I'm also against an idea of any human community as closed. Now, that means human beings as existing, we stand out from being. You see? Look at every society, there's a story of realizing our humanity as having a responsibility for our possibilities. Why it's important is because that, in effect, means whatever a human being is today is not the end of a story. And that means we are actually always trans. Mm-hmm. You see? In my office, I have a big sign that says, God is trans. Because remember, we forget that it's silly. God can't have a gender or a sex. God is properly a they. But even beyond that, I'm not talking if you believe in a God, but even if you take God out, there's no reason for the human being, when we emerge as possibility, to be the last story of what a humanity is. And in fact, the error is to force onto us a purity that closes off our possibilities. And this closes off not just our identity, it closes off our capacity for pleasures, for communication, for life. So some people, because of all the work I've written on blackness and a lot of other issues, and my political work, presumed that I would join others in putting a line on the trans dimension of human existence. But I don't. I think there are so many possibilities of human life to come, and what our job is to do is to set the foundations for those lives to live with such dignity and respect that they look back at us and say those beautiful words. Obrigado.
Thank you. Obrigada, Lewis, Gordon. A gente vai encerrar, então, né? Eu queria avisar que o livro do Lewis Gordon vai estar à venda, está à venda aqui do lado. Talvez ele assine os livros. Queria agradecer aos intérpretes de Libras, ao Davi Luiz e ao Felipe Medeiros, a intérprete inglês-português, Alexandra Cristina Bobbio, e avisar que amanhã a programação continua a partir das 11 da tarde, da manhã, desculpa, e continuando pela tarde. E é isso. Obrigada e obrigada ao público.